A broken body. A life in fragments. Yet from these scars, emerged one of the most immortal forms of art the world has ever known. Frida Kahlo was not born into ease, nor did life ever grant her mercy. Her story is not a tale of comfort, it is the story of defiance against pain, of a spirit that refused to be silenced, even when the body betrayed her. When we look at her paintings, vivid and raw, we are not just seeing color on canvas. We are entering a battlefield. Every brushstroke bleeds, every image whispers of wounds that could not be hidden. Her art is not a mask, it is an unveiling. But to understand Frida, we must go deeper than the museum walls. Beyond the iconic face adorned with flowers, beyond the fame that came later, lies a woman whose greatest masterpiece was not simply her art, but her survival. This is not about what she painted. It is about where it came from. From illness. From shattered bones. From loves that burned and betrayed. From a soul that turned agony into creation. And so we ask, how can suffering become strength? How can pain, instead of destroying, give birth to beauty that endures forever? This is the story of Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo entered the world in 1907, in Coyoacán, a vibrant corner of Mexico City. A land alive with colors, traditions, and the fierce pulse of identity. Yet from the very beginning, her life was painted not only with beauty, but with struggle. At the age of 6, a silent enemy struck her body, poliomyelitis. A word heavy with consequence, a disease that left her confined, fevered, and fragile for months. While other children played in the streets, Frida remained behind closed doors, facing a battle far greater than her age. The illness spared her life, but it left its mark. One leg thinner, weaker, never to grow in harmony with the other. It was a scar that would accompany her every step, a visible reminder that her body was not whole. From then on, her gait carried a limp, and with it, the cruel whispers of other children. They called her, Frida la Coja, Frida the cripple. Words that cut deeper than any wound. But where others might have surrendered to shame, Frida transformed her solitude into defiance. She dressed with boldness, covering her frailties in vibrant fabrics, adorning herself not to hide, but to declare, I am here. I will not disappear. Even as a child, her spirit burned brighter than her pain. While illness sought to weaken her, it became her first teacher. It taught her resilience, imagination, and the ability to confront suffering with creativity rather than despair. From her earliest years, she carried both shadow and light, two forces that would define her art, and her destiny. From the beginning, we might say, pain was her shadow, but also her first teacher. And that lesson would return again, years later, with a force far greater than childhood illness could ever deliver. September 17, 1925. A date etched into eternity, not only for Frida Kahlo, but for the history of art itself. She was just 18, a student full of ambition, carrying books and dreams as she boarded a wooden bus with her schoolmates. It was an ordinary day, until fate intervened with brutal precision. A streetcar collided with the bus, crushing it like fragile glass. The impact tore through the passengers with merciless violence. For Frida, the consequences were catastrophic. A metal handrail pierced her abdomen and pelvis. Her spine shattered in several places. Ribs broken, collarbone fractured, right leg crushed. She was not merely injured. She was destroyed. In that moment, between the wreckage and the silence that followed, many believed her life had ended. Yet somehow, through will, through mystery, she survived. But survival came at a cost. Months stretched into endless nights of immobility. Her body encased in plaster corsets, confined to a bed, every movement in agony. She was forced into stillness, trapped in her own broken frame. For many, this would have been the end of youth, of hope, of all possibility. But for Frida, it became the beginning. Her parents, desperate to ease her despair, placed a mirror above her bed, so she might see herself when she could not rise. They brought her brushes, paints, and a simple easel adapted to her confinement. And so, horizontal, encaged by plaster and pain, Frida Kahlo painted for the first time. She painted herself, because who else could she reach? She painted her suffering, because what else was real? Through the mirror, she confronted the only subject she could not escape, her own wounded body. And through painting, she discovered a freedom her broken bones had stolen. She could not move her body, we might say, but she liberated her soul in colors. From that bed, a new Frida was born. Not the carefree student she had been, but the artist who would carve beauty out of torment, who would translate agony into vision. The accident was her crucifixion, and her resurrection. Frida would never again know a day without pain. But she would also never again be ordinary. What began in tragedy would ignite a fire that no injury could extinguish, the fire of creation. Lying in her bed of pain, Frida Kahlo discovered what many never do, that art is not always born from beauty, but from necessity. What began as a way to escape her immobility soon became her lifeline. She turned the mirror above her bed into a portal, and her face became the subject that returned again and again. Self-portraits. Dozens of them. Eyes that stared back unflinchingly. A face both fragile and fierce. Why this obsession with herself? Because her body was a prison, and the only landscape she truly knew was her own suffering. Each stroke of the brush was not vanity, it was survival. She painted herself to understand herself, to confront the agony that medicine could not cure, to claim identity in a body that no longer belonged to her. Her early canvases carry the weight of this truth. They are not idealized visions, nor fantasies meant to please. They are raw confessions. Broken spines, bleeding hearts, images of isolation and defiance. Every line is a scar, every color a scream. Yet in this pain there was a strange alchemy. By transferring it onto canvas, she transformed torment into testimony. Her art became her voice when her body failed her. And in this, we witness the birth of Frida the painter, not merely someone who held a brush, but someone who dared to expose the most hidden parts of human suffering. Through these self-portraits, Frida declared, "This is who I am. This is what it means to live inside a wounded body. Look at me. Do not look away." And so a question arises, one that unsettles us even today. What if art was never meant to be beautiful? What if art, at its highest calling, was meant to be true? For Frida, truth mattered more than harmony. Expression mattered more than perfection. And in the unrelenting honesty of her canvases, she revealed something universal, that the human spirit, even when broken, can speak with a force greater than any body. It was here, in solitude and suffering, that the painter Frida Kahlo was born. By the late 1920s, Frida's art had already begun to take shape, but destiny introduced her to a man who would become both her greatest passion, and her deepest wound. Diego Rivera. He was already a giant in Mexico, celebrated for his monumental murals, paintings that towered over public spaces, drenched in political fire and cultural pride. He was twice her age, larger than life in every sense, in fame, in appetite, in ego. When Frida met him, she did not see a legend. She saw a man whose artistic soul resonated with her own. Bold, unapologetic, unafraid to confront reality. She showed him her canvases, trembling with both hope and defiance. Diego looked closely, then declared that she was, indeed, an artist. That recognition lit a flame no accident could extinguish. Their connection was immediate and consuming. Soon, Frida and Diego married, a union that shocked many. She was small, delicate in stature, wearing traditional Tehuana dresses. He was massive, often described as grotesque in appearance. Yet together, they were a storm. But this was no fairy tale. Their love was volcanic, erupting with passion, but also with betrayal. Diego's infidelities wounded her deeply. He sought comfort in other women, sometimes even within Frida's own circle. Each betrayal tore her heart apart. And yet, she returned to him, again and again, bound by a love that was as destructive as it was undeniable. For Frida, Diego was not only a husband. He was muse, rival, tormentor, and mirror. He gave her validation, but he also gave her anguish. And it was from this cycle of passion and pain that some of her most powerful works were born. Her canvases filled with bleeding hearts, broken bodies, dual selves, images that reflected the impossible contradictions of their bond. Diego was her fire, and he was also her wound. And so we might say, her heart broke countless times, but each fragment became a painting. Each tear became a brushstroke. Each betrayal, another masterpiece. Through Diego, Frida learned that love, like pain, could destroy, but also create. Their marriage would become one of the most famous, and infamous, unions in art history. But more than that, it revealed Frida's courage to turn even her most intimate wounds into timeless truth. Frida Kahlo's art cannot be separated from her body, because her body was both the canvas and the battlefield of her life. To understand her paintings is to walk through the corridors of her suffering, her identity, her defiance. She did not create to escape reality, she created to confront it. At the heart of her work lies pain. Not the abstract idea of pain, but the intimate, relentless kind that carved itself into her bones. Every operation, every sleepless night, every moment of physical agony found its way into her brushstrokes. She once confessed, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, because I am the subject I know best." Yet these self-portraits are not acts of vanity. They are acts of survival, mirrors reflecting a body fractured, but a soul unbroken. Another recurring theme was motherhood denied. The accident had left her unable to carry a child to term. Miscarriages haunted her, each one a reminder of the life her body could not sustain. Instead, she birthed her grief onto canvas. Works like Henry Ford Hospital are raw confessions of this absence, placing her broken body in stark dialogue with the machinery of the modern world. Through them, Frida gave voice to an experience often silenced, transforming private sorrow into collective recognition. Identity, too, pulsed through her art. She wrapped herself in the traditional dress of Tehuantepec women, with elaborate skirts and braided hair adorned with flowers. This was not only aesthetic, it was political. In a Mexico emerging from revolution, Frida embodied the spirit of her nation, declaring pride in indigenous roots and cultural heritage. Each detail in her attire and her canvases was a statement. Mexico was not to be ashamed of its past, but to wear it as strength. Her work was also inseparable from politics. Living alongside Diego Rivera, surrounded by communists, activists, and revolutionaries, Frida infused her canvases with questions of justice, of struggle, of freedom. But unlike Diego's grand murals, Frida's revolution was intimate. She did not paint crowds or slogans. She painted the war inside the human body, the oppression within silence, the chains of expectation placed upon women. For this is where her greatest defiance shone, her independence. In a world where women were expected to stand behind men, Frida stood unapologetically in her own truth. She smoked, drank, cursed, loved who she wished, men and women alike. She was transgressive not because she sought scandal, but because she refused to pretend. And through it all, her art became the immortal vessel of her being. A body that medicine could not heal, a heart that love could not protect, became eternal on the canvas. She once said, "I never paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." And that reality, raw and uncompromising, is what makes her art immortal. Not an escape from life, but its most fearless confrontation. By the 1930s and 40s, Frida Kahlo's canvases began to travel farther than she ever could. From Mexico to New York, from Mexico to Paris, her work entered the great capitals of the world. She became the first Mexican artist of her generation to exhibit in the Louvre, her self-portrait entering a museum that had enshrined centuries of European masters. In Paris, she met the Surrealists, who claimed her as one of their own. Yet Frida refused the label. "I never paint dreams," she insisted. "I paint my own reality." But even as recognition grew, her body betrayed her more with each passing year. The accident had left its permanent scars, and surgeries multiplied like chapters in a grim book. Pain was no longer an occasional visitor, it was her constant companion. In 1953, doctors amputated part of her right leg. For most, such a blow would end all movement, all participation in life. For Frida, it became one more trial to face with unyielding defiance. That same year, a major exhibition of her work was organized in Mexico City, the first solo exhibition of her life in her homeland. She was too ill to walk, too weak to stand. But she refused to be absent. She arrived in an ambulance, wheeled into the gallery on her hospital bed, adorned with flowers, dressed in full Tijuana splendor. Guests entered expecting to see paintings. Instead, they encountered the living presence of the artist herself, fragile in body, but radiant in spirit. She laughed, she toasted, she filled the room with the same unbreakable force that had guided her brush. Her body was giving way. But her spirit would not surrender. The body was failing, we might say. But the spirit, never. Frida Kahlo did not simply leave behind paintings. She left behind a vision of what it means to endure, to resist, to live with wounds that never heal, and still create beauty from them. Today, she is more than an artist. She is an icon of resilience. A symbol of defiance against pain, against silence, against the roles the world tried to impose upon her. She stands not only for Mexico, not only for women, but for all who have ever carried scars and wondered if they could still shine. Her Casa Azul, the blue house in Coyoacán, remains her sanctuary. Its walls, once filled with her laughter and her anguish, now breathe with memory. Visitors walk through its rooms as if entering a shrine, each corner whispering fragments of her life, her brushes, her dresses, her bed with the mirror above it. The space is not a museum of artifacts, it is a living testament to a spirit that refused to be broken. Frida Kahlo's legacy is not measured only in exhibitions or the millions who recognize her face. It is measured in the courage she awakens in those who see themselves reflected in her honesty. She proved that even a shattered body can carry an unshakable will. That even in fragments, one can become whole. And so, her message reaches across time. Pain does not need to be a tomb. It can be a seed. A seed of creation. A seed of truth. A seed of immortality. And now the question is yours to carry. What in your life seems like a scar, but may in fact be the starting point of your most immortal art?